my background and experience is trying to get new things off the ground that people have already written off. When we look at the ecosystem, and a lot of the discussion this morning to me is a very narrow slice of the world that I focus on. So while app developers are really important and app distribution is significantly important, I think Alec kind of touched on, he started to go a little more out to the ecosystem. The ecosystem for us as Intel is everyone that's part of that innovation cycle in the platform development. From the time that we convert sand into something that you can run electricity through and compute on, till the time the consumer's figuring out what they like and don't like on a platform. And for us, that's really been the crux of 30 years of history, is creating platforms that people can innovate around. So if I'd have to say the biggest problem in mobile that we see today is the solidification of the walled gardens. I don't have a problem personally, and I don't think we have a problem corporate-wise about someone trying to build a vertically integrated business model, but when it starts to prevent people from innovating and actually inhibits the innovation that's driven our industry for the last 3 decades, that's when we really start to look at what do we need to do to accelerate this, to kickstart it, to get back to what we do best, which is just about the time everybody thinks every problem's been solved and we've got it all wired, somebody new comes up with something radically different and flips the whole thing on its ear. So.
And I think probably a lot of people are nodding their heads, but can you take another minute on that? What happens when these silos are created? Why does that impede innovation?
Well, I think what it probably the simplest terms that I could put it in is that it creates the rules of the game that everyone starts to play by. So when you've got an environment that everyone realizes, okay, I know how I exist in an iOS environment, I know how I exist in an Android environment, and that's the rules that everyone starts trying to play by to win. How do I get ranked? How do I do merchandising? Instead of thinking about how do I create a whole new consumer experience, how do I create an innovative service, how do I change distribution? How do I break through and create something? And Rob kind of touched on this. We were talking after his panel about apps are wonderful, but I'm a simple kind of computing guy. App to me is just compiled code that you run on a compute device. It just got really kitschy because it's an easy way for consumers to get it. They don't have to go to retail. They don't have to think really hard about it, but it's compiled code. When you go to the mobile web and all of a sudden you break all those barriers down, you can give consumers, even today, almost the same experience in fewer steps and with more variety and even more choice. So, I think to me that's the problem with this vertically integrated solution, is that when it starts to preclude other people from being able to create, equally parallel and more interesting environments, then I think as an industry we start to kind of grind to a halt. You've got developers who are saying there's 12 interesting platforms that are going to come out in the next 18 months. I can only afford to develop for 1 or maybe 2.
Jonathan, same question about how you look at the ecosystem, and maybe set the table a little bit. I think one of the things that interests me, Zynga, huge game maker, probably no more significant publisher in terms of our consciousness, our awareness. You have a relatively small team in terms of business development that has to go out and think about how do you maximize, optimize across lots of different platforms. I'd be interested in how you approach it, what you see deficient in terms of doing partnerships, what you would like to see happen.
Sure. So Jonathan Fletcher, head of business development for Zynga. I'm considered an old timer at Zynga because I've been there for about 3.5 years. So formerly at EA before that, so know both the console, PC, and kind of web and mobile worlds. For us, distribution is all about getting access to a consumer for the first time, so they download that app. And I do view your kind of view of what an app is as the right way of thinking about it. It's just a bag of bits. The second is a channel for re-engagement, and most people don't actually think about that. Surprisingly, one of the most effective channels on Facebook, which is where the company really made its name, is a bookmark function. And that people just don't get. And that obviously is kind of built into a smart device because you're automatically bookload on some screen somewhere. But those two are the keys that we look for when we're going out for distribution of our games. And people talk about, kind of the app economy and the App Store being broken. I think that's a bit of a strong word. I think it's changing. It's a bit of an inflection point right now because it's kind of almost sagging under its own weight. We've dumped all these apps into these kind of traditional store models, and there aren't good channels for discovery, which is that first part, getting the consumer, and re-engagement, retaining the consumer in this current construct. No one has brought to what I think of as the kind of disruptive force that Facebook brought to the casual web gaming world, which was bringing social discovery and context. So discovering what your friends are playing and then being re-engaged through that social discovery. So we need that on mobile, and that's what's super interesting to us. And that's why disruption is interesting to us, because anything that gives us new channels to acquire and re-engage our users is great for us. The challenges right now, again, on Apple, we've run over this a lot on kind of the top 10 lists and how do you get there. Zynga's fortunate to have been able to generate a fairly significant mobile audience. I mean, more than half of our audience is now mobile. So we can re-engage through our own channels. We can acquire through our own channels. But it is very hard for us to move the needle, which is why if you look at our distribution of our apps by platform, it's Apple iOS. That's where the money is, and that's where the scale is. Android's big, but it's not monetizing as well yet, but that gap's closing. So that's our second platform that we put a lot of effort behind. And then it trails off very significantly from that. And it's hard for us, from where we sit trying to make mass market games that connect the world, to spend a lot of time in devoting our development teams on experimenting on lots of other platforms. But my confidence is that someone will figure out that thing that breaks the mold from the top 10 list, the editor's pick, whatever it is, because you can't cut through that noise of the App Store without that disruptive thing. And for us, because we make social games, we'd love for that to be social-based, because that's how we know how to work those channels.
It's very interesting. And just make sure that I understand it correctly. So, because this issue of re-engagement, I think, is a really significant one for us to talk some more about. And you have re-engagement that can happen on a social level. You have re-engagement that can happen because you have a significant installed base. But getting beyond that in terms of re-engagement is the challenge.
So, perfect example is I get installed onto a device, and I go through this dialog screen that says, "Do you want to allow this app to give you push notifications?" That channel is getting burned out because every app is giving you push notifications. They're giving you useless push notifications. They're not relevant to you. And you now, if you're like me, you just say no, no, no. You don't even think about whether that app does have something relevant for you. It's kind of what happened on the early days of Facebook. Facebook actually killed a bunch of their original viral channels. I don't know if you remember, there was like a little notification feed where the chat was. They shut that down because apps were allowed to just publish to that constantly. And it almost became a presence meter because you'd see this stream of app publish, which just burned out the channel. So as a developer, if I get an app installed on a device, now I say, okay, so I can re-engage through a push notification on the device. It's not really working because it's just burnt out right now. So you need stuff that's relevant to the user in a way to re-engage them. So it's coming, and I think someone will figure out, and that's where we're going to be putting our resources.
Just that video that Michelle put up, I think, was touched a chord probably for all of us. You don't have that issue that's talked about here so much because you have a significant installed base, but did that ring true for you?
Oh yeah, no, I was laughing the whole time. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, we're in a slightly different space, obviously than a smaller startup game developer. But we are, just the natural occurrence on games is that they eventually leak people out. Whether it's on an individual game or on a network of games, they leak people out. So we're always having to acquire new users in that funnel. So we experience that exact same thing. Just dumping a lot of money into it. And, the pricing right now is kind of off the charts. So. We're constantly looking for new ways to grow, and those are the biz dev deals that we focus on.
this is just general market question. Do you know, I mean, what is the cost for acquiring a real user? I mean, not just somebody that's looking at it, not really doing anything with it. Is there a sort of a market price for it?
Honestly, no.
I think I'll give you $20 if he says I don't know.
That's a very situation specific, because I mean, it costs to acquire a user. I mean, what kind of user are you talking about? A generic gaming user? Or are you talking about someone that's like for a social casino game versus a Farmville style game? That's all dependent.
Okay.
And I'd say the one of the other things I forgot I was wanted to bring up on this. You see actually distribution, cross promotion between these apps, and this is a real problem in the app ecosystem. It's stovepiped. So you look at these different applications and you say, okay, you talk to, say, a browser company, a mobile browser company like a Dolphin or something, and you say, hey, we'd love to get some promotion from you, or we'll give you promotion. And it doesn't translate across verticals well at all, and in fact horribly. So you're kind of constrained in these groups. Games can promote other games, but even then you got to get into what genre, is it a kid's game promoting a kid's game, or is it an adult game promoting an adult, those types of things. And that harms kind of the ultimate growth on top of this kind of challenges around the app stores themselves. So again, we're still struggling for that new thing, a new disruptive way to grow.
In some ways, some of what you were talking about is a silo effect. So I would be interested to talk a little bit about Gamestop, and maybe for a moment, I'm interested in the same thing about the ecosystem, but be interested just in starting out a little bit about how you approached your retail business. What do you do to differentiate? How do you get people into the store and buying with you as opposed to Best Buy or online? And do any of those lessons translate to mobile?
So the answer I'll give probably has nothing to do with mobile, but I'll answer it anyway. So Chris Petrovic, I run the digital practice for Gamestop. The kind of kitschy punchline of what my group does is trying to figure out how we become more like Netflix and less like Blockbuster. At least that's what people tell us we are. A lot of differences in those businesses, but still I think the analogy is apt. For us, the differentiation in selling physical product at a retail store that doesn't have the benefit of selling things tax-free doesn't really hinge on fancy things like mobility. It really hinges on things like customer service, informed sales associates, and a ecosystem that is value-friendly to consumers in that we allow people to trade stuff in to subsidize new purchases. Whether that's a game, whether that's a console, whether that's a tablet or a smartphone, those two categories are recent entrants in that, and probably one of the largest retailers in those categories that we're in kind of overnight, which speaks volumes of our scale as well as our customer base. But we obviously, with those last two categories, that's a segue into how we view mobile broadly. We view it along a number of axes. One is, how can we participate in the ecosystem to a meaningful way that gives us enough relevance in the marketplace for consumers and everybody else that's making hardware and software that we can extract our share of the dollars that flow through that serves as a hedge against a more mature business in the console gaming category. And I think that's, we prognosticate about the future of digital gaming, the future of mobility broadly speaking, and what we always talk about. I'm actually based out here in Northern California, and our company's in Dallas, so I tend to bring a lot of that Silicon Valley Kool-Aid to Dallas, and they tend to douse me with barbecue sauce, right? So it's a good mix. You wouldn't think that goes well, but it actually goes well. Everybody understands there that there's a technology threat. I think what they've seen time and time again is that nobody can get the chronology right, and chronology is a very specific answer to each company. But we understand that mobility has taken a bite out of the handheld gaming market, right? And mobility to a certain degree has taken a bite out of the web gaming market, and we own a couple of web and PC game distribution platforms that are now moving into mobile themselves. For us, we look at everything from how do we enable mobile to improve shopping experiences, how do we enable mobile to allow people to transact as opposed to on their PC, and then how do we enable ourselves to sell mobile hardware, mobile accessories. And I think the real the one topic that is most germane to this conference that we struggle a lot with and are coming up with answers for is how do we insert ourselves in the app sales ecosystem, right? Because there's been this common, at least back in the old days of smartphones and apps, there was this notion that being in the App Store equated to distribution, and that's really no longer the case. Distribution is now defined as how do I acquire customers on a cost-effective basis. It's just, this is the first area I think in digital where the notion of endless shelf space is actually a hindrance, and retail and curation is actually kind of relevant again. So our thoughts, and Trevor, you and I have had discussions about this, is that a company like ours that has a trusted brand, that has a huge global footprint, relationships with developers and publishers, and most importantly, a very voracious customer base, that if we can create enough of a compelling experience to keep them in our ecosystem, that we're okay with renting them out, if you will, through customer acquisition efforts and marketing initiatives, to the end developer, the end publisher. We're not really worried about losing that customer anymore. We used to be worried about it, that once they grab the customer, they're going to own them for good. But we don't really believe that anymore, and I think we're trying to figure out ways of how to bring our retailing and distribution sensibility into the mobile gaming space, because there's a lot of dollars floating out there. There's a lot of inefficient spending going on to acquire customers that you don't know the first thing about. And if we can tell you that of our 21 million strong loyalty membership base here in the US, which makes up the majority of our US revenue, so really the true whales of gaming, if we can tell you what their gaming patterns are across console, PC, web, and mobile, and sell that to you, developers and publishers are going to pay a premium for that because they're already paying a fraction of that for uninformed customers or unknown customers through really shady means, right? Whether it's incentivized installs or whatever the case may be. So I think this notion of, this experience platform, or we're calling it our customer platform, and how people can come into the ecosystem to break the mold of how it's working today, which is not working, and offer a new way to connect consumers and content creators more efficiently, I think is very powerful. I think Amazon has a great shot at doing it. I think we have a decent shot at doing it just in the game slice, and on top of that, we'll sell them and buy back their hardware, as they do their refresh cycles, which is becoming a $500 million business for us in a matter of a year. So it's a very interesting time for somebody like us, and I think more relevance than I think we felt perhaps in the past in the digital space, specifically around mobile.
Can I ask a question? Are you looking to bridge? I really, as an old retail guy, I used to run Computer City stores for Tandy, so I can tell you that the birth and death of big box retailing. I always thought GameStop's real strength was this kind of alternative currency that you created through the trade-in program.
Right.
But I've never actually seen a real transition to take that into a full virtual. How do you take those guys and go, well, if you don't like what's something in the store, you can go online and put your card in. And
I think for us, we're in the process of creating a centralized virtual wallet where people can upload their funding sources.
Yeah.
Because all of those things are code-based, right? So
Right.
as soon as you give me your gift card or your points balance in your loyalty program, you have a dashboard, and you can attribute any of those funding sources to your purchases.
well, then you have an on-ramp for all those
Right.
kids that don't have credit cards,
Correct.
but grandma bought them a game for Christmas that sucked, but they know they can get 60% of the value back
and
get
buy
those
some apps,
games.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly, yep.
Two things. I just want, if you would, I know it's hard to do this, but to repeat again that point about the endless shelf space being a limiter, I think that'd be interesting. Because I think it's a really fundamental point. The other thing that I'd just like to ask about, I went into GameStop. I'm not a gamer, but I bought some games. I had an incredibly great shopping experience. And the person who was helping me was terrific. And the things that I saw around the store were things that were unique. I mean, there were features that were distinctive just to games sold in GameStop stores. The curation of it was very easy to find what I wanted to. Do those things translate to an online selling experience in a clear way, such that you can hold on to that value proposition? And is there a limiter in the ecosystem that prohibits you from executing on that?
It's interesting. So I think when you look at our e-commerce sales through the desktop web, we actually offer an expanded selection of things that you won't find in our stores, because our stores are relatively small. They're probably no bigger on average than kind of the circumference of this building. So you have that polar end of the spectrum where we offer thousands of products that you would never find, in store. And then, as we think about mobile gaming, that the number of games that we feel we should be curating to our customers is a real small subset of the overall amount of games that are in the store. So we're kind of going back to this real curated experience. The challenge there is that, the dollars involved in selling a curated subset of games is just not all that meaningful today. If you just kind of do the numbers, if we're partnering with 50 to 100, 200, call it 1,000 developers, and they're paying us, $5 to $10 a head to acquire a customer, that's still not a lot of math for a $10 billion company. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the challenges is like you look at mobile as a category, mobile gaming as a category, and the numbers are huge, but it's so fragmented that, we can't even see a way today other than providing a value-add customer service by providing them a curated app or a curated destination to actually make a lot of money such that it justifies investing those dollars. So it's really we're trying to figure out what that looks like for us. So the inhibitor is really kind of ROI, and what is it going to drive to the bottom line of the company. Now, for optics purposes, it makes sense to do it because if you're not in any digital, then you're even more hamstrung than you are today by being a retailer. We just by background, we reported in 2011 $500 million of digital revenue. And when I got there in 2009, we were sub 100 million, and we're projecting to do 650 this year, and we said we're going to do 1.5 by 2014. So we're doing a lot of interesting things that a retailer can do to generate, digital revenues. It's only going to be 10 to 12% of our overall business in 3 years. So it's just, kind of small but growing. So it's still those are the kind of challenges that classic innovator dilemma stuff that we go through in our company daily.
And then just the last thing on that, in terms of 1,000 developers, whatever number that you would look at, is having those relationships with those developers, is that itself cost prohibitive? It's so mature with games,
public, right.
and
there's a few of them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so it took GameStop however many years to build and maintain relationships with the EAs, Activisions, Ubisofts of the world, and we'll leverage those relationships. But when you're opening up if we launch a discovery service and call it a marketing platform for mobile games, we don't have those relationships built in. I think there's a certain amount of work that we've done already to kind of start raising awareness for what we'd like to do. But I think there's also very viral channels within our communities. The groups, message boards, publications, et cetera, are all read by the same folks, and I think we get a lot of inbound interest. But in terms of going to sign deal, we don't have the infrastructure in place to do outbound kind of developer relations to bring them into this ecosystem that we want them to spend money into. So that's something we either think about funding internally or working with partners, and we haven't quite figured that out, but that is also an inhibitor. When you look at things you don't have core competency in today, companies get uncomfortable about pulling the trigger on spending money on a new venture.
But the pace and the size is at a whole different scale too, right? When Activision does another Call of Duty project, there's 24 months of anticipation and $50 billion that's going to go into the marketing campaign.
Right.
Rovio tried for 10 years to get a hit in mobile. Nobody would have bet on that company.
And it's still just as of last year, it was $100 million, right?
Right.
That's how much. That's how much we sold in one day of Call of Duties, right?
Exactly.
Just us. So it's like.
So it's the pace that it changes. You can't shoot ahead, and the scale and the size. It doesn't fit the traditional models of how do you line up for success.
Yeah.
And I tell our folks internally all the time, we're trying to manage analog dollars against digital dimes, and that's a very hard equation. Nobody in the history of media, especially on the retail side, that's transitioned from physical to digital, and even been proactive about it, has gotten that right. And I like our chances as much as the next one. It's not going to be without a lot of challenges and pain points, but the fragmentation, the new business models, it just makes it hard when you have a business that's predicated on selling premium products along with multi-tens of millions of dollars of marketing that's given to you in exchange for your customers, and all of a sudden now I'm talking to a developer about, is he going to pay me $5 or $6 to get a customer to his free-to-play game? It's like,
Yeah.
Anne-Louise, you were, I remember when we first met, you were talking about things that I don't think a lot of people were thinking about at the time, developer ecosystems and innovation. I remember it so vividly because at the time there was really one ecosystem around Apple, and the idea of sort of cultivating a developer network was sort of unclear why, because there was sort of a perfect world. I'd be interested in how you've approached building your ecosystem and that general question of how you view it overall and where you see limitations.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Anne-Louise Kardas. I am based in the Berlin game office. I'm part of Sprint's CTO organization. My role is to look for emerging startups or technologies that Sprint should take a look at. Apps wasn't my core focus actually for the last 18 months, and it's back into that now. So I think, carriers and phone manufacturers have been in this ecosystem the longest actually. Then, for the past, starting in 2007, et cetera, nobody cared about the carriers anymore. We've been the bad guys for so long, et cetera. And it seems that, that's shifting, especially this year with other guys being the bad guys, which,
Only for a while. You guys have come back.
Exactly.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
But that lens, that gave us the opportunity also to really rethink, why would we even want to continue to attract the developer community? What does apps mean to us, et cetera? And really, as a carrier, we do love apps because, quite frankly, as you probably all know, our revenues from the voice standpoint are declining. Apps help us drive a lot of data revenue, so that's definitely what we're looking for. A lot of our own carrier services that we would market to our customer base, like navigation, etc., are now totally becoming dwarfed by how big of a revenue we're making out of Google Play. So we're really seeing a big shift, rethinking, okay, how can we take advantage of the apps in the ecosystem that are actually making money and helping those developers even more. And I'm really interested in the thoughts of the group as far as that. How do you attract? The bigger guys are telling us, well, we don't pay to play. The smaller guys are like, help us, but we're like, you're kind of small.
Right.
So and getting to finding interesting models to attract the mid-sized developers. The other piece that I wanted to touch on is this ecosystem that everybody seems to forget about, although this morning that question came up really quickly, was the infrastructure cost. Somebody's got to pay. I mean, there's a lot of expectation that these networks will be here forever. I saw Vishal's slide saying, the gap between the infrastructure and the phone usage. We're going to get 100 million, be able to do all these things with the data on the networks. Well, there is a cost to that we all are trying to figure out right now between the carriers, all the content providers, and developers too, is how do we sustain the ecosystem to be able to continue to give the customers what they want.
So you guys are in your business around apps is aligned with Three's vision, which is the store within a store, as opposed to kind of having your own independent store as well?
Yeah, so we actually took the position back in 2009 not to have our own store.
Right.
We had our own store, our feature phones on the open platforms. We decided not to.
We remember those very well, for those of us.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so just leveraging what's existing there. We do have the same Google Carrier channel that Three is leveraging to feature certain apps. We do have an application called Sprint Zone that our customer use to manage their account, and as part of that, we feature the same apps that are in the Google Carrier channel are featured there.
But unlike some of your competitors, you've chosen not to confuse them with multiple app stores.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we decided that you buy a smartphone and you should be educated. We're trying to bridge the gap between getting our customers to use apps in the existing stores versus creating a brand new store.
And you control the billing.
We do, or not necessarily.
The user's option.
It's the developer's option to use carrier billing, and it's the user option to decide if they want to use the carrier billing option or just whatever credit card.
And you don't dictate which apps are in your store by virtue of which of the choices are made, right? Like you leave it pretty democratic.
Yeah. So what we've tried is an experience where the developers are actually paying for placement. So in the list of 15 apps in the Google Carrier channel, we launched this auction service about a year ago, where we're saying, if you want to be the first spot, you can, go into an auction and pay to get the first spot. And so that's been the interesting thing, marketing that to developers is, the big ones are like, come on, I don't need you guys, I'm not paying. The smaller ones are like, it's an expensive proposition, which actually it's not. It's less than 1 cent per click, so it's actually not.
Do you end up with things that maybe you would have preferred weren't in that spot because of the open auction?
Yeah, so we do curate it a little bit as far we want to make sure privacy policies are very well set before they get into that spot. We also want to make sure the content is appropriate to our customer base and all that stuff. But that's the limit of it. We actually don't curate it that much for now. We're thinking of other ways to maybe have a specific channel for games, where here we would have a more directed, curated approach and leverage maybe some of the partners at this table.
It's challenging. I mean, we look at this in our distribution efforts, both at the multi-store approach, which is super challenging when every single store asks for integration with their APIs, SDKs. They want something unique. You got to give me something unique. This is a real challenge for us as a developer, because we're maintaining or trying to maintain a single code base, because our games are services, they're not products. Right. The second thing comes down to, like what I think you were alluding to is in my opinion, platforms benefit dramatically from all types of content, not just monetizing content, but other types of content that don't necessarily monetize. Right. You'll see lots of different types of apps, some recently acquired for large sums, that make zero money, but are great for the platform, because they drive engagement, they drive data usage, they drive all sorts of stuff that's ancillary benefits to you. So I think that would be an incredibly challenging thing to get right in running a store.
So I want to go to questions. I wanted to ask you just one thing on this point about apps and driving data usage. Does that math work? I mean, having data-intensive apps drives people to use more data, and that's a good thing?
Well, right now, with the deployments of LTE, we're getting to a point where we're figuring out if it's going to work in the long term, definitely. So that's why I was saying earlier, we're looking for ways to have the whole ecosystem come together and realize. And actually, our competitors are helping us in that way. They're starting to educate the customer. This is not a free lunch anymore. You hit this, you have to pay more. So we're trying to maintain, the unlimited and making sure customers can enjoy what they want. But there's, it only goes to a certain point.
I said one. I just want to sneak in one more. I mean, in terms of exclusivity, I mean, do things like that drive a decrease in churn or bring more users? Are there any of those kinds of techniques that you see in retail that work?
Yeah, so because we're trying to differentiate by being the good guys in the ecosystem and definitely not we're fostering innovation versus getting exclusive like AT&T and Verizon maybe try and do more. So we're trying the approach of get to the great apps and the great type of content that definitely drives more user. The exclusivity is not necessarily a mandatory thing that we require to get folks to use the app. So it's something we're trying to avoid. In some instances, it does happen.
Siloing effect.
Yeah.
What was the thing that you guys tried in distribution and it failed, but at the time it looked like a really good idea?
A store on Facebook.
Store on Facebook?
Yeah. Yeah. F-commerce. It really was F-commerce.
What do you mean?
It was effed up. I just, it's not that we won't revisit it again. I apologize, it's not on mobile directly, but, at the time, we were kind of one of the early movers of launching a curated kind of e-commerce environment within Facebook, and you realize that that's, at least at the time and for the foreseeable future, I would argue that that's not why users are there. And then just because you have a critical mass of eyeballs that are all sharing information doesn't mean they're at the bottom of the purchase intent funnel and wanting to buy. And so that was, we didn't recoup our money and what it cost to build it and maintain it.
Yeah.
So we may try again, but we were pretty public about pulling it down.
Anybody else want to take that?
It's a loaded question.
Zynga has a problem because you're a public company.
Yes.
I'm a public
clearly,
company. I was able to say something.
This is like a Romney-Obama debate.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry, anybody?
Under scrutiny, I should.
Gigi?
It was so much more fun when you were private, wasn't it? I love being on panels with private companies because they can say whatever the fuck they want. And they're like,
Chris, I have a question
Yes.
for you. Is, with the GameStop gift cards, and I don't remember if you could you pay for World of Warcraft usage?
no.
So they would just buy the World of Warcraft cards from
Correct.
you and then do that? Did you ever look at like maybe, doing the,
We have that available on game platforms that we own and operate. So
Uh-huh.
Congregate is one, and then there's another one called Impulse where you can use a gift card as a cash-based payment mechanism. But we haven't rolled that out to external partners.
did you think of partnering with like some of these other people who buy credits to play mobile games?
Yeah, I think we always think about like Chris mentioned earlier, we have huge liquidity sources within our ecosystem and loyalty points, trade credits, gift cards, cash that you can roll into other things. It's just moving the money from us into a mobile game, especially in those areas where it's controlled by a walled garden, is really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think the guy from Velti was mentioning earlier that there are developers and perhaps more people thinking about how to execute financial transactions outside of the walled gardens that won't run you afoul of their terms of service. I think those terms of service will consistently change to make that challenging, but a lot of us are trying to figure that out because I think there's a lot of money that's being left on the sidelines because you only have a kind of primary single source of a credit card, and that just addresses just a small subset of the general population.
Yeah, maybe on the distribution question, I think one thing that wasn't a good experience is for a while we said, well, let's see how it plays out and kind of take a step back and actually not do anything. We even at the same time we were thinking we need to help. A lot of the users were getting a smartphone for the first time, getting into the Android market and not understanding how to get apps. So we pushed a way to distribute apps, ringtones, and wallpaper through a mechanism called Sprint ID, which was really a way to get a bunch of applications all in one package. You're the golf enthusiast, you're going to get all the golf apps, etc. And what initially we really tried was to get partners to actually build those packs. Again, saying if it's the Sprint ID pack, people won't want to download it, but if it's the EA, etc. And we got some success with a lot of partners on that. But we realized recently that actually, our customers, pick your carrier for a reason. There is a huge trust factor, and so getting more Sprint branded ID packs was actually a good idea, and a way also for us to help, the companies that we want to use and leverage as well for our customers. So we've kind of changed that focus and are building, the Sprint Green pack and a few other utility packs that our customers are downloading as well.
That's very interesting. So that makes it easier for consumers to not have to go out and pick 7 different things, but they're sort of curated around a...
Yeah. And at the same time, they can take out the apps they don't like in that pack, and once they're more comfortable, put whatever content in there that they want.
Yeah, makes sense. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and just as a heads up, because it says we're going to take a break. If it's okay with everybody, we have one more panel on where the money is going. That Alistair Goldfisher is going to moderate. I think if we could, rather than taking a break, we'll go right into that next panel, and that way we'll finish up. We can go to the winery, and we'll have time to be able to chat and talk. So
I think that's a great idea.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Noonan.
I have 2 questions for the colleague here at Zynga. The first question is around effectively the model that we see emerging in gaming is sort of setting the pace for everything else that happens. So in monetization in particular, games are clearly ahead of the pack. The paywalls are more evolved. The in-app purchase mechanisms are more evolved. The A/B testing around monetization is more evolved. So have you guys ever thought of actually bringing it to apps that are not games, or bringing it to sort of mechanisms that are not games? That would be question number 1. And question number 2 would be around the models. I mean, we are a micro venture capital fund. We're pre-analytics driven. We like looking at retention, engagement, all those things. We actually have a mobile social gaming company now, a portfolio that's done very well, but we learned a lesson, which is the retention forecasts are incredibly complex. Zynga has made a small mistake recently to that respect. I mean, how do you guys think about that? How do you think about retention, and how evolved is the industry? Maybe you don't need to speak about yourself, but how evolved is the industry in looking at retention in gaming?
Oh, so it's 2 questions there. Yes, we absolutely see a lot of companies kind of taking these techniques, the gaming techniques, and applying it to different industries. It's not something that we do. It's outside of our core expertise. We make games. But there are certainly lots of startups that are taking gamification, in-app purchases, all sorts of stuff to various industries. And that's incredibly interesting to watch and see that evolve over time. So yes, but not us. The second, before I forgot your second question?
Second question's around
Your retention curves? Yes. So retention curves, it's a really interesting question. Retention on mobile is actually just shorter than web, just in general. But it really varies by game type, by user. Are they a payer? Are they not a payer? It's incredibly sophisticated, and there's a ton of analytics behind it. So that's a tough question to answer in generality. But yes, it's very, very well developed, and it's one of the things we watch most closely, because you work so hard to acquire a customer. Once you lose them, it is very hard to get them back in. So that's part of what we call the leaky bucket. Don't want to start dumping water into the leaky bucket until you make sure that it doesn't leak too much, because all buckets leak. And so that's one of the primary attributes that we watch, for sure.
You know, my least favorite term, but my most favorite attribute is this gamification, right? I think Jesse Shale coined it a couple of years ago at DICE. If you haven't seen the video, I'd be surprised.
Brilliant.
But it's really just basic Pavlovian, behavior modification, right? It's no different than Chris training his customers that if they do the pre-order, they get a discount and they'll get some exclusive stuff. Or the carrier saying, hey, if you use carrier billing, you get a little discount, or we'll give you a kickback, or we'll send you some promotions. Or a grocery store sending out the coupons on Wednesday because they know you're going to go shopping for the weekend, and they want to give you a little lead time and train you to come in when the new products and the trucks roll in. So
I definitely agree. The grocery store is a great example. It's that company that does those coupons, the printout tickets across all grocery stores. That's all done on a high-end analytics background.
Right.
Like that they're just combing through your purchases based on your loyalty card to see what you're likely to buy, and they give you a coupon on the spot. That's on demand. That type of gamification element. But I think a lot of people use that in the wrong way and think that you can just throw badges on a website for reading articles or doing something silly. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to continue on that, because you brought it up around other verticals and media in particular that are trying to take inspiration from gaming around business models, monetization. I think the very nature of gaming is so much more different than listening to a song or watching a video or a movie or reading an article. And just, I think there's over-dependence on taking inspiration from games to say, well, why don't we just charge in small chunks to unlock chapters or verses or scenes? And it's that linear experience, people just want it kind of all at once, and I think that's why subscription models there are faring better as opposed to in gaming. Just the mechanics of gaming are conducive to these different business models where I believe personally they're not in other forms of media.
I actually think if you look further down the road, it's not the abundance, it'll be the shortness of supply. If you look at platforms like Gilt or Fab or these ones that are running these flash auctions and creating this instant consumer behavior, because if they don't act in the next 72 hours, right? Groupon built their whole business around this. Unfortunately, 5 billion people copied it, so kind of wore out its usefulness in terms of I got to act now. But really, that creating that instant consumer behavior, right? I need them to act. And I need them to act soon because I don't have time to try to reconnect with them a few more times.
The last little shameless plug I'll make is that, for my own personal opinions, is on the free-to-play model. I personally believe, as it relates to tablet games, that there is a window of opportunity for developers not to exhibit that lemming-like behavior and go down the path of starting off at free, especially if you're targeting a certain audience, and or you have a strong enough IP that warrants some kind of what I'll call a pay-me model, which is pay me some upfront for access, and I'll unlock some value for you as a consumer, but also pay me within the game. And I think because of the form factors of the tablets, I think their abilities to plug into these devices, we've created a wireless Bluetooth controller that works with Android games on Android tablets. I think, you have somebody that's bought an unsubsidized device in many cases for $500+ that said, I want high def content and I'm not afraid to pay for it. And yet people are, I think in smartphones it's lost, right? Like the ability to charge a premium is only left to the few, but I think on tablets.
I disagree a little bit on you partially to say that that's really game genre specific.
That's why I said for our audience. I said for our audience. Yeah,
But
yeah.
even within your audience, it's going to be dependent on the game genre. It's going to depend on whether you need critical mass for a lot of players in the game. Like, are you running a multiplayer game where you need lots in there?
But I also think you're going to see the same curve that followed console and PC gaming in terms of cost of development and cost of marketing. That same thing that same curve is going to permeate here. And what cost $250,000 2 years ago is now $2.5 million. In another 5 years, it's going to be $25 million. And you're going to start seeing games that are kind of back to the old console days. And brands will matter, and marketing budgets will matter.
Yeah,
and
you already have. It's
already there. Yeah.
So we unfortunately need to wrap it, but if it would be okay, I'd like to just ask for 2013 a soundbite on what disruption you would like to see. For anybody who would like to take that, what disruption in the app distribution and discovery?
Are you going to limit it to that? Okay.
You can do other stuff if you don't have one on that.
I'd like a third player to really succeed in 2013. I think it's the benefit of the entire ecosystem. It's not just Apple and Google, but find is it going to be Microsoft? Is it going to be RIM back in the game? I'd love that.
I would like for any platform/OS to be able to enable the individual sale of apps as, think about it as products, and I know that you run them as services, but people come into my store today and they're buying App Store cards and Google Play cards. Imagine if you could buy, an individual game, mobile game, from an online retailer, from an offline retailer, from a carrier that just through a code-based redemption or some API unlocks that download automatically. I think that would help the developer community quite a bit because you have people that want to, that's a form of curation, right? And if instead of selling an App Store card, I can sell the top 100 game cards that have a currency or denomination.
Could also bundle at this point, like
with cross-platform bundling and
TV apps with TV screen.
So and by the way, Apple already has, as you developers know, they have the infrastructure to do code-based redemptions, but they do it on a promotional level. If I could ever convince them to commercialize that infrastructure and start doing individual SKUs, if you will, I think that would be phenomenal. And Google has the ability to do it first because Apple just is not there yet, but they're just getting their prepaid card business off the ground. But individual game sales would be phenomenal for me.
I'd love to see super effective social channels on mobile, both for acquisition and re-engagement.
So I would say my preference for next year would be twofold. One, that devices and the environments that run on them actually become adaptive to us. I believe we've catered our lives to the devices far too long, and it's time for the devices to start to cater themselves to us, whether that be location, cache preferences across apps and preferences, time-based, whatever. And then the second would be that we continue to really quickly evolve the man-machine interface. We've all gotten real comfortable with touch. Every device in the world now, including PCs as they move to touch screen ultrabooks, will all be touch. Right? Anybody born in this century will never know a world without touch. Voice, Siri was a great experiment. Dragon is on version 47 now that they're called Nuance. I'd really like to see that evolve and then eventually start to even get into